Hello, everyone. Was muted. Welcome to the System of Care Learning Series. My name is Lee Taylor, and I am going to go over a few things before we get started. Heather, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the Team Kentucky logo? Okay, thank you. Our session today is in Zoom webinar. That means that all participants are muted and your videos are off. We are recording the session and it will be available soon. I dropped the link in the chat box and I will do that again during the session. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for questions. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. And also, if you have a question about what Heather's talking about in the moment, feel free to pop that in the chat and she'll respond. If you need transcription, click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And as always, we know that there may be technical difficulties, so we appreciate your patience if we encounter any of those today. To be eligible for continuing education credit or certificates of attendance, you must be in the content portion of the webinar for at least 90% of the session to be eligible for a certificate. This is a mandate by the boards. Please do not leave the webinar until the conclusion of the Q&A, as that counts as part of the content portion of the session. You do not have to enter your contact information in the chat, as all attendees and your time is tracked by Zoom. You must register for each session and join with the link that was emailed to you. If you receive the link from a friend or coworker, we will not be able to track your attendance and you will not be eligible for a certificate. Also, just a reminder that you need to keep using the same email address to register for each session, because that's the unique identifier that we use to track your attendance throughout the learning series for continuing education credit. By the first full week of December, you'll receive an email from me that will provide a link to access the session evaluation, then your certificate. This is a screenshot of the landing page for the evaluations and certificates. You complete the session evaluation to proceed to the certificate. And lastly, you are responsible for printing your own certificate. We do not mail or email those anymore. This website houses several years of the System of Care Academy. So if you lose your certificate, you can access this website to print another. And now let's learn about our presenter. Heather Bushelman has been in education for 20 years. After graduating from Morehead State University, she started as an elementary teacher in Warren County. Her passion for whole child education and meeting students' needs, both academically and social emotionally, led her to complete a master's degree in elementary counseling and rank 1 in secondary counseling from Western Kentucky University. For the past 15 years, she has helped create and sustain 3 comprehensive counseling programs within Warren and Boone counties. Part of her role as a counselor also included being the positive behavioral intervention support coach, social emotional learning coordinator, leader in me trainer, and leadership roles within the district professional learning communities. Heather's a member and president-elect of the Kentucky School Counseling Association Board. She is currently the 2022 Kentucky School Counselor of the Year. Heather has been honored to provide trainings for counselors and educators across the United States, including Nevada, California, Texas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Topics have focused on social emotional learning implementation and best practices within the multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS model, trauma-informed strategies, and the many different aspects of creating a comprehensive counseling program. Serving now as the program coordinator for comprehensive school counseling at the Kentucky Department of Education, she is passionate to continue her advocacy and support for school counselors around Kentucky. So thank you and welcome, Heather.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here virtually with all of you. Let me share my screen. There we go. Okay, hope you can see that. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Make it bigger for you. So thank you for that introduction, Lee. So I'm excited to be here. Anytime I get to talk about best practices for our students. I am on board. So thank you all for joining. I know this time of year, in whatever setting that you're in, I'm sure is crazy and it's so busy. So I know we appreciate you being live here to take part in this training. What we're going to focus on today is just how we can wrap around our students to promote positive mental health, because we know right now with the numbers, the data that we're seeing, our students need us more than ever, as well as our families and our educators. And so we're going to talk through some different strategies to focus on how to use every stakeholder imaginable within a school, within a community, to just help our students. And like the title says, just to be able to wrap around them. So in the chat, just to kind of get us mindful of our setting, we always want to be where our feet are at. I would love to see, based on the cat pictures, I'm a huge cat person. Sorry, my dog lovers. I would love to see which number you feel like you are right now. And you can just put that in the chat. Okay, we got some 5s, 3s, a lot of 1s, it looks like. 6s, 4s, got a 7. Okay. All right. So it looks like a great variety of kind of where we are as a cat. I think I'm a little bit of a 1. I think that's my daily occurrence, probably more consistently as a 1, with just everything, that I get to oversee, at KDE as a program coordinator for counseling. So, all right, thank you all for answering that. And again, that just gets us to kind of get our mindset of kind of where we are, especially being the afternoon after lunch. And so we're gonna try to be as engaging as possible, because I'll be asking you all some questions to chime into, and of course, feel free to ask questions. What I would like to know as well in the chat, I know a few of you have put it, I would like to just see what is your role? So in your school, in your settings, in your communities, are you a school counselor, therapist, a frisky? Are you a social worker? I just like to see, kind of gauge what our crowd is for today. Okay, so some friskies, case managers, okay. Oh, behavior consultant, some therapists, psychologist. Okay, great. So we have a lot of mental health providers that I'm sure you work, I hope you get to work with your schools, some different case managers. Okay, awesome. Well, I hope for our time today that you will be able to see, based on what we discuss and the different strategies, how you can, if you're already collaborating with your educators in your school settings, just maybe some different ideas, some different collaborations you might consider. And so our goals for today, at first, I'm just going to kind of review very briefly our current statistics in Kentucky for mental health. I know there's so many surveys and data out there. I like to kind of pull it all in one place just a little bit, just so we're kind of on the same page, because, numbers, it's hard to argue with numbers. And so just to show the need of what our students, is happening in our settings right now. And then we're going to talk about a lot of tier 1 initiatives. When we think about our MTSS model, tier 1 should be a lot of focus of how we use every stakeholder as much as we can, because if your tier 1 is proactive, it's done with fidelity, then your students who really need those tier 2 services and then into the tier 3 realm should decrease. So that's where we want our focus to be on, because like we're going to talk about, wrapping around our students is vital right now to start decreasing some of our numbers with some mental health needs of our students. And again, we'll talk about all stakeholders, including your role, and how you collaborate with your schools, your communities, and your families. So just to go briefly over some Kentucky statistics, I'm sure some of you have seen some of these numbers. So 1 in 5 of our students are dealing with mental health issues. And when we think about those mental health issues, those are just some of the specifics that are the more diagnosable ones that we're seeing coming out of our doctors, our pediatricians, our psychologists, our psychiatrists in the communities. When they come into the schools and our families are having, maybe medication applications being created for them, or different plans if they ask for an IEP or a 504 sometimes. Not all of them need those things. We know that. But that's a lot. And if you think about some of the schools you're working with right now, I know my school I came out of right at a year ago, we had 900 students, K through 5. So that's a lot of students dealing with mental health issues that if you look at one classroom, of 30 kids, think about how many students are having some of these mental health issues that may not be diagnosed or may not be getting seen for some of these things. Because only 20% are getting their services. We know before COVID, I know a lot of my settings and the feedback I know I've been getting traveling around the state, there was already waiting list, and you all are seeing that in your settings where students are struggling to get seen. Families have a hard time, especially with insurance issues. I know up here in Northern Kentucky, there's waiting lists all over the place. And then we have Cincinnati Children's, but it's in Ohio. So they have to have certain types of insurances to be seen, and to hopefully get somewhere where that their kids can see a therapist or somebody who can help their family. So that's concerning. And since COVID, it's gotten even worse because now that we have less therapists who can come into schools, we have some more like telehealth options. But I know in a school setting, as a school counselor, I know that would be hard to put an elementary student in an office by themselves with a computer to see their therapist one-on-one for an hour with a computer. So I know, so that's really not feasible. So I know we need to think about how can we make sure with our collaboration that we do wrap around our students as much as we can, especially when we have so many students on waiting lists, and we can do whatever we absolutely possibly can to help them when they are with us at schools or in the community. And of course, 70% of these issues that occur in children can be addressed through early intervention. And that's a lot of what we're going to focus on. We can't necessarily take away a diagnosis, nothing like that. However, with how many more of our kids are experiencing anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, the more proactive we are with early interventions, those numbers are going to start decreasing. And so it's a process. It's not going to be an overnight fix, obviously, or these numbers wouldn't be where they are. But that's really why we're thinking of everything we want to do is proactive. We know where our students are. So what do we do about it now? And then this is from the KIP survey. It's given every 2 years, like I'm sure most of you have seen. And I just kind of pulled a few of the graphs from that it's a little, it's alarming. When you see the rise in how many students are reporting serious psychological distress and poor mental health. Now, during the pandemic, we knew that. You're shut down at home, socialization is removed except for technology pretty much. And now you're seeing a family dynamic completely shift. So if we think about where our kids have been for that year and a half, essentially, they were with their families, could not do a normal routine, and dealing with a lot of very traumatic experiences between job losses, money issues, sickness, death, natural disasters on top of that we, are dealing with Kentucky. Our students have been through a lot. Our families have been through a lot. And so it's no surprise that our students are reporting increases in all these different mental health issues and mental health behaviors. And I know coming from the elementary, it is trickling down a lot more with our younger students. We have 6-year-olds showing up talking about anxiety and depression. Sometimes they know what that means. Sometimes they hear it at home because maybe mom is struggling with depression. They hear that word, they come to school, I'm feeling depressed. So that's a whole education and informing that we have to do with our younger students and our families to talk about what does it really look like? What are some of those symptoms and behaviors? And then here's some things about some different suicidal statistics. I think for me, the most alarming in these next 2 slides are our younger students. For the most part, a lot of our teenagers in that realm are, their data is pretty well, the same, which we don't want it that high, no matter what year and what's happening. But it's getting younger and younger, the amount of students who are sharing they don't want to live. They have no hope. They have no purpose. We have a lot of, I know for me, a lot of like third graders, that's where it really started with serious suicidal ideations. It wasn't attention seeking, but it was serious issues happening where they did not see a purpose, and they're 8. So that's very concerning with the numbers of our younger students growing. And of course, the suicide attempts, again, you see our 6th graders, that's alarming. I mean, they're 11 and 12 years old and they are attempting, whether they have access to things at home, between drugs, firearms, things like that. And that, I think, is why this is such a need. And I know we have so many groups in Kentucky, like with you all and your collaborators, of our students need so much help right now. Our families need help, and our educators. We're having to almost retrain how we serve our kids now, based on we have so many students who are reaching out and need help. But what do we do about it? They still have to teach content. And for a lot of you all, you have parameters with insurance, your caseloads, things like that. So we had Dr. Carolyn Stone come and do our statewide cadre for our school counselors actually in October. And the recording is on my KDE website. If you ever want to glance at it, it's a 3-hour block. But we have a script that shows what topic she talked about during like the minute increments. If you ever want to glance at that, she talked from domestic violence to suicide prevention, how counselors, go with special education, about LGBTQIA+. So she kind of hit on everything legal and ethical to consider with mental health, with screeners. So if you're ever interested, it is on my site. You're more than welcome to watch that. But she shared some statistics from Kentucky. And this one, I think, was for me the most alarming, is that we are the 2nd highest state in the nation in domestic violence incidents. That's alarming. I didn't realize we were that high. So when you consider having a pandemic, being in your homes, and we're the 2nd highest state, think about the mental state of our students. And now we're coming back to as much of a normal routine as we have, and they've experienced all this with a lot of us not knowing. And so now the behaviors are coming out and it's reactive. And so that's why we want to wrap around them to be as proactive as we can. And there's, the increase in our youth that's in foster care. It went down and now it's jumping back up to those 2019 numbers. And you can see the different demographics of those youth. And the suicide rates in Kentucky, of course, are rising. It's the 2nd leading cause of death for our students, starting at age 10, up to 34. But for that to be the 2nd leading cause of death, that is concerning, especially down to age 10. Because again, our students are not seeing that they have a purpose or hope, and some mental health issues may not be getting seen or taken care of due to, a variety of different issues that are happening. There's the homelessness statistics that are in Kentucky. So of course, at least 4,000 people are experiencing homelessness. And you think about between, the pandemic, natural disasters, how many more of our families are now considered homeless? I know a lot are still living in hotels that have had the disasters happen, based on if, traumatic events happen during COVID, are they having to live in maybe with grandparents or, or maybe a shelter, things like that. So we really need to consider that when we're looking at the mental health state of our students and the predictability and their routines.
Heather,
yes.
while you're talking about the rates, before you move on, someone had a question. Is the domestic violence rate based on number of incidents or per capita?
I'm trying to think if Dr. Carolyn Stone talked about it. I don't think she put it on her slide, so I would have to go back and see what she got the information from, if it was per capita or if it was by incidents. I thought she said incidents, if I best remember it, but I don't mind to check. Whoever was asking that question, yeah, I'll be happy to check, because it is alarming. So yeah, so no, I'll be happy to check. So this is from the Surgeon General's mental health advisory report. And again, it's a lengthy report. But based on what we're talking about today, I thought this graphic sums up everything that shapes our mental health youth, for our young people. You have they're at the center, of course, our students, and then their families are, of course, their close-knit, trusted adult, we hope safe group around them. And then the community comes next, which is all of us. And then you have your environment. Is it safe? Do they have access to different things? And of course, natural disasters, you see right there, that's going to affect it. And then you have society in general. Do they see equity in where they are? What do they have for as far as media technology, different types of government policies? So all of these things trickle down to wrap around our students, which is what we're going to think about today. So I'd like for you to put in the chat before we continue, with you all working with schools, or within your communities, what are kind of the top 1 or 2 major mental health issues you are seeing within your students or families are bringing to you about their kids? Let me glance at the chat. Okay. Anxiety.
A lot of depression and anxiety.
Yep. Okay. Oh, opposition. Yep. Substance abuse, bathroom issues. Okay. Yeah, from abuse. Okay. So anxiety, depression is obviously the top 2. In the school setting as a school counselor, that's what we were seeing. And I know for us, it was hard because with such young ones, they are hearing this constantly at home, or we have 7-year-olds on social media, they are seeing it on social media. And it's very hard sometimes to kind of separate, are they really having issues, or is it just something they've heard and they've seen so much where they think they have something? And so as a counselor, that's something you have to work with your therapist and your school psychologist to really figure out, what is this kid telling us? Are they saying this because mom says it? Or are they saying this because internally something is happening and they're crying for help? So yeah, the anxiety and depression, I know it was spiking for us even before COVID with our young ones. And then post-COVID, it's like tripled for a lot of our students. So how do we know the state of our students? And I think that's, to me, the number one question is, we have all this data and of course surveys, things like that, but in a school, how do you know what's happening with your kids? Are they being talked to? Are we hearing from them? And of course, a lot of people use screeners, which is great. Between Panorama, Terrace Matrix, I know a lot are using Sabers. Infinite Campus has a student thriving index that is almost more of a whole child index, because it adds in some of the healthy habits like sleep, physical health, things like that, along with the mental health piece. And I think we have to be careful with the screeners, number one, because you typically, I know Dr. Carolyn Stone mentioned this in her training, talked about, depending on the questions you ask, you need parent permission to ask questions. Even if it's a tier 1 screener for students, you have to be careful what you are asking, if it's only an opt-out for parents. Because if you have students show up as high risk, low risk, hopefully nothing would happen, but let's say something does, school could be liable because the parents technically didn't give permission for certain questions to be asked about mental state, things like that. So we have to just be careful about that. And what are these screeners telling us? Is it data that is usable? Do the kids answer as honestly as they're going to? And what's the process after the screener? So they take a screener. So then what happens? I know in a lot of districts, they take the screener, students are, red flagged or they're showed at risk, and it's up to the school counselors to make sure these kids are okay. Well, as a school counselor, I'm sure a lot of you have seen, they are assigned a lot of other responsibilities that are not seeing kids. Scheduling ARC meetings, 504 meetings, assigning like lunchroom duty, things like that, to where if you have to shut down and check on all these kids, if they have all these ARC meetings to do, then who's doing that? So that's concerning. And so we want to make sure if there is a screener happening, is there a protocol in place of we get the results, then what happens next? Are we using it to provide interventions for students, supports? How are we discussing with the families what the results are sharing? Are we discussing with the students when we discuss with the families kind of some of the answers that they provided if it is a need? And they're at risk for something. And are we talking to kids? I know minute meetings are pretty popular because literally they are minute meetings. They're very quick. And anybody in your building can do that. Your Friskies, social workers, your administrators, classified staff. So it's not just a counseling tool per se, because when we would do our minute meetings, it wasn't counseling questions. It was more questions, just seeing how they were doing, just checking on them. Like, hey, do you like school? Do you have friends? What activities do you do? Do you participate in? So it's like 4 or 5 very quick questions. And from that, students will start sharing, well, I hate school. I don't want to be here, versus they may not put that on a survey. But you start getting the student voice. And I think for us right now, with how our students' mental health issues are rising, that's my number one stakeholder, is I want to hear what my students are telling me is happening in their world, school, home, community, anywhere. Because even a 7-year-old will tell you honestly, they don't feel safe at school. They don't have access to a counselor. So they know what's happening. So we don't want to ever assume this data shows us this is what's happening. We need to get some student voice. In the secondary schools, I know student roundtables are very powerful. They can be led by, if there's an advisory council or student council, if there's an SEL student group that kind of drives some of the SEL implementation in your middle or high school. Those are great groups because it's peer to peer. And a lot of students will share things with other students that they will not share with us, even as a counselor or even as a therapist, because they feel safer with some of their peers and they know the purpose of it. It's to be heard. So any type of stakeholder group like that, I think would give you probably better data than some of the surveys, or even to support them. I know we had our student advisory council last week through KDE, and they wanted to talk about school counselors. The students did, and as a school counselor, that was like, that's so exciting. Like, what teenagers want to talk about school counselors? And it was alarming. To have teenagers see in their buildings, their friends and their peers are having the issues you all just shared. As adults, we know are happening. And a lot of their students are having to wait weeks to months to be seen by a school counselor. They're in the building every day, not to mention that they're not being seen by a mental health provider that's coming in as a therapist. So that's concerning. And the students were very honest about, we know it's not the counselor's fault because we see them doing scheduling. We see them having to do assigned duties. We see them having to do scholarship things. And of course, as a school counselor, we have to be experts at college, career, academic, social, emotional. And the students were saying, we really wish they could focus just more on our social, emotional needs and our mental health. So that was very eye-opening to have students say that kids are not getting seen when they need to, which is why some of our issues keep rising, because they're not getting seen or it's reactive. But again, they're our number one stakeholder group, and they were honest, and I totally appreciated that. So when we think about our students being proactive and some screeners, I wanted to share a few of these with you. Dr. Brett Zaromsky did a statewide cadre back in February, and he shared some of these free options. Again, you can do them for tier 1. You might just, if you've never used them, just start with maybe a small group of students based on whatever need you have. But some of these will show some data that's a little bit more in depth about, like, hope, for example. Hope is by far the best predictor for success. So with our students who have such high rates of suicidal ideations, they have no hope in anything they're about to do. They don't see a purpose. They don't see hope, whether it's a 16-year-old or it's an 8-year-old. They see nothing that they are contributing to at school, at home, anywhere. So why would I stay here? That's their end in mind. So some of these will help, like with the anxiety, that may gauge how truly anxious are some of our students. And is it a diagnosable anxiety, or is it just this student just needs some coping skills, very individualized, and practicing habits where it's not diagnosable just yet. They're just struggling to, daily functioning because something has happened. So I just wanted to share those with you all, so you had them. And as far as staff training goes, I hope with a lot of your roles that you all shared in the chat, I really hope you are able to collaborate with your schools if you're not in the school, because I'm telling you it. I mean, if we want to wrap around our students, the community resources, they are so resourceful and just geniuses in helping us know, as even a school counselor, what should we talk about with our educators and our families to ensure we are giving the right information. So when you think about your staff, what trainings have they had? I'm sure they've had trauma informed, because of course that is in legislation that they have to have that ever so often. Are they doing PBIS or something similar to that, where it's a consistent, management system, across the whole school? Restorative practices, are they being trained in those initiatives? And is it being implemented? That's a big difference. Restorative practices, I know it's great in theory, but is it really being done with fidelity in your building? Because it is a paradigm shift in discipline. Social emotional learning competencies, I know that's the biggie right now. Everybody wants SEL. Well, great. We've been doing SEL for many, many years. We just didn't call it that. And actually, social emotional learning, it's based on family needs. That's where it kind of created from, was from our families, and then it trickled into our schools. So it's very interesting when families don't like it. It actually started with families, and then it came to educators second. But social emotional learning can be tricky because I know a lot of people want quick fixes, and I get it. And we all know, I think, in our worlds, nothing is a quick fix. It's a marathon. If you work with a student, you're not going to fix that kid overnight or in a month, or else a lot of us would not have jobs. So we have to develop different habits and meet our child's needs. And so social emotional learning is not just buying a curriculum, teaching it once a week. We've checked off that box. It is so much bigger than that. It's a culture shift with your adults and your students, because adult SEL is just as important if your students are going to get it. And I have some other trainings about that, but implementing SEL without having to buy all these bells and whistles can be done. Because again, it's just training your staff of, what does it look like in your classroom? If you're teaching math, how can you embed student self-awareness or self-management or goal setting? So it's a lot of those mind shift things that our educators may want to consider with whatever trainings that are being offered for you. And then I've provided, let me show you real fast. We had a mental health fact sheet that really helped. Again, as a school counselor, I've always had to chair ARC meetings for, 16 years. Really is not recommended for school counselors to chair ARC meetings, but that's okay. We're working on that at our state level. But this helped us as educators truly understand, when we have students get diagnosed with anxiety, ADHD, OCD, what does it really mean? Because there's so much stereotypical, I think, language out there about, oh, well, if they're OCD, this is what I should see. If they're anxiety, it just means they worry a lot. Well, no. So this kind of helped. Whenever we had students get diagnosed, we would pull this information out with their teachers, and whoever was serving that student that needed to know, like, hey, this is what true anxiety looks like. And when you have this student, this is how it's individualized for that kid or those 3 kids. Just so that way it's not stereotypical anxiety. It's, how do we meet this student's needs when they are really diagnosable anxiety? And I know some educators want to label very quickly. You have, an impulsive little 7-year-old girl that can't sit still. They're struggling to work. They shout out a lot. Oh, they're ADHD. Take them to the doctor. They need medicine. No, we have to be very careful. We're not doctors. We do not diagnose, number one. But number two, have we even looked at the whole child to see what's happening? Do we understand, why are they shouting out? Why are they not working with the stamina we consider a 7-year-old student should be working? So we have to be very careful. So this just kind of helps some of my staff to figure out, so if this is the diagnosis and this is my student needs, could be some accommodations and some things I could do in the classroom for that student. And then another thing, that I showed, if you've ever seen me train before, I know I've shown this some, and I have a training about it too, but I know a lot of my staff in our district, they were great at they were trauma informed. We had PBIS, we were, a leader in me building. We had SEL implementation, tiers 1 through 2, and then up to 3, went to the mental health realm. But I noticed my teachers and my staff, as much as we knew about our students that had been through trauma, and even those who hadn't, we were struggling with behaviors as they happened in the classroom. So, for example, we would have kids that were shouting out all the time. Well, we can't just label them as ADHD because they shout out. And we can't just punish all the time because it didn't fix the problem, or kicking them out of our class. They're still going to shout out, whether or not they're in my office or in, a classroom. So we really started looking at, what do our teachers need? Because as a school counselor, I really had to get good at using every stakeholder I could possibly use to help our students. Because it wasn't just a me issue or me helping these kids. These are all of our kids. And that's a culture thing for all of your buildings. If we see these kids as all of our kids, whether or not I've ever had them in a classroom, it's going to change how we talk to each other, how we intervene with our students, and how we see behaviors. And so I would train my staff about this behavior toolbox. And they're, educators, think about it. Unless you're in special education or a school psychologist, we really don't get trained on functions of behavior. What is it communicating? What do we do about the behaviors? I know in all my classes, I never had any of this. And so I've just learned it over the years and found some things that worked and some that didn't, depending on the kid and what they needed. So this chart, our teachers kept it close, like in a drawer on their desk. A lot of it put them on the wall so they could reference it real fast. But it's essentially a toolbox for MTSS. And when I have my kids in my classroom and they're doing these behaviors of looks like, sounds like, what are they telling me? Regardless of a diagnosis, regardless of trauma, this kid needs adult attention. This kid needs peer attention because they're doing some of these behaviors. And SEL they need to develop some positive relationships or identify their personal assets and what's good about them. So this helped them to start seeing behavior in a very different way versus discipline. They don't need to be here. They don't act right. They get honest because I had the sister 5 years ago, whatever it was, or we're going to diagnose it. That's ADHD. Well, we can't admire the problem. We have to help our students to support them. And so this gave them some strategies to use for some of the functions. And over the course of the year, if they ever needed me to come just model or just help coach them through some of these strategies, like, oh yeah, what's like the blurt box? Can you tell me what that is again? They were always very open to us popping in and just, showing them, yeah, this is it. This is how you do it real quick. This is not extra. This is not, I'm teaching extra lessons to my kids. This is giving our teachers back their teaching time. That's ultimately what happened. Behavior referrals decrease, which I know right now is huge. And then we also had our tier 2 and tier 3 menu of interventions. And this changed every year. And again, as a school counselor, I did not do all of this. I've never had a behavior coach. My past two schools, we did not have the blessing of a frisky, unfortunately. So we'd never had social workers. So it was like, how do I get, people to help wrap around our students? This was the start. And so that way, without my tier 2 blowing up and being way over the percentage, this helped our tier 1 stay what it should. It was more proactive. And our teachers started owning the behaviors versus pushing the kids out all the time. And it helped them just to change again their paradigm of, oh, if I have a kid, for example, that's melting down or, whatever, it's emotional regulation. They're showing me they are struggling to regulate emotionally. Here are some ideas that I can do to help that student. And I would tell my teachers emotional regulation comes first. If you've got kids showing 2 different functions, you've got to deal with emotional regulation first, because nothing else will get fixed after that. And then I've also provided in here, there's some different data tracking ideas. I know a big question I get is, if you're offering all these ideas over in this chart for tier 2, how are you tracking it? Because we don't want to throw behavior charts at students. That's a whole other training, but just a little snippet. Behavior charts are not a quick fix for tier 2. They collect data, and they're for adult attention seeking kids. Absolutely great. Check in, check out, great for those kids. If that's your only tier 2 option, I guarantee a lot of your students are not improving as they should, because the function of behavior is not being met by a chart. So there's some ideas for data tracking, and my teachers always chose how to track it. A Google form, a calendar, Post-its. Some of them love Post-its. As long as they could give me numerical data, I was happy. So you've got that chart, and and like I said, that's a different training. If you ever want to clarify anything with me, I'm happy to help.
Heather,
And yes,
we have a lot of requests for asking if people can get a copy of the slides or these resources. Some of them are really tiny and they're having trouble seeing them. Can we send those out?
yeah, I tell you what, I will share the link. Okay, I'll put the link in the chat right now. Would that help?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad they said that. So thank you all for telling me they're really tiny. It looks big on my screen, so I apologize. Okay. All right now. And then KDE, of course, they're actually revamping their social emotional behavioral resources. But there may be something specific in those resources you might want to talk through with your staff. I know, so that's a good one. I always like to show this to my staff, to again remove the stigma of anxiety is just kids who worry. This is what anxiety looks like a lot of times in our students. And our educators need to understand an angry kid might be anxious. A kid who doesn't focus might be anxious. So we have to consider, again, function of behavior. What is the kid telling us? So this kind of helped my teachers to step back and say, oh, let's talk with our families. Is the kid having difficulty sleeping? Is the kid overly negative? So different things like that, that again, wrap around the whole child to think about what's going on with this kid besides just the behavior I am setting my eyes on every day at school. And of course, some red flags. And this is any staff member in the building, classified, certified, everybody should be trained in these different things, because there are going to be times when your bus driver is going to see changes in behavior from kids before any of us do. They're the first ones to get them. They're the last ones to see them, right? So they need to understand if they start seeing behavior changes as much as they can, bless their hearts, have to drive all those kids on the bus. They may need to come to us and say, I've noticed this difference. And our families need to know this. A lot of our families may, kind of brush it off as, oh, it's a teenage thing. We really have to be careful about that if it's a long-term change and it's very sudden and it's pretty severe. So you looked at, I'm not going to read all these, but, there's a shift in mood. Our school nurses and our health aides, oh my goodness, I would always ask them who's got headaches and stomach aches and are not going home and they're not sick. That is a clear indication there's a kid having anxiety. and something's going on with that student because they have physical ailments because of the stress they're feeling. They avoid things or uninterested, decreases in performances. Technology is the big one, especially for families. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And of course, if they start discussing suicide, death, kind of, out of nowhere, or even slowly, they start putting it into things. And of course, written or drawing visual ideas. And of course, the at-risk behaviors. So that's just good for your staff, just to kind of keep in the back of their minds. Because again, if I'm a school counselor, I've got 900 kids. I'm not with them 8 hours a day. But who is? Our educators. Our cafeteria monitors see them every day for lunch in their social setting, which is very eye-opening. Our bus drivers see them. Our custodians see them randomly, okay? So you've got to think about who has eyes on these kids that might notice some behavior changes that can then come to us as a FRISC, as a community-based therapist, if I'm in the building that day and working with my school counselor, as a social worker, to say, I've noticed this, how can we help? And so that way, then we take it from there. So some proactive just tier 1 initiatives. Service learning is great to give kids hope, especially if it's student driven. This allows them to have a purpose. So if students have a cause, they are passionate that they would like to help, whether it's raising money, it's clothes, whatever it is, have the students lead that. I know those of you who know a Leader in Me school, that's a big part of what Leader in Me does promote is student leadership. They drive their service learning projects. They just maybe fill out an application and they talk to the assistant principal, whoever might be running that, get it approved, and then the students lead it. They do the announcements, they collect everything. You talk about giving a student hope and purpose that may not have it. That is huge for their leadership and to help them decrease some of those mental health issues they might be having. Of course, appreciating the different styles, demographics, and safe spaces. My goodness, our students that come to school expect to be safe. School's supposed to be the safe place. And if we're not providing an environment where our students feel that they will not be harmed physically, if there's a lot of bullying and harassment verbally, then something needs to be looked at for tier 1. And your kids will tell you. They will say to you, they feel safe in their classroom. They feel safe in their hallway. They feel safe in their school or on the bus. And the safe spaces is also when our kids come to school, of different demographics, genders, all those different things. Are they having to hide a lot of who they really are because of a safety issue? And because a teacher might say something that's negative, derogatory, or they feel like they have nobody at school they can go to be safe. Because like we talked about before, our students are waiting weeks to months to see a counselor if something's happening. So just having your staff understand, school is safe. And you don't have to agree with every little bitty thing that your students may come to you with, even their hair color, but it needs to be a safe environment for them to learn in, or else they're not going to learn. And then all students involved in something, a lot of schools will have students make sure they're in a club, a sport, something with the arts, just to get them involved in something that is their genius. Again, purpose and hope, something to look forward to. And of course, SEL we've talked a little bit about, and just consistency in the whole school. I even think about like our secretaries. When I walk into a building, how am I approached? How are my students approached? Are they talked down to because they're a kid? Or is it, here comes that mom again? How are they approached? Our secretaries and bookkeepers, attendance clerks, they are sometimes our first line of defense up in that office. And how is that culture? No matter what the day looks like, how are people being greeted? And are they looking into people's eyes, giving them their time, even though I know it's crazy day. We all know that. But every staff member has to be consistent with the message and how we talk to our students, provide those safe spaces and the expectations. So if you've seen me, of course, present before, I always promote this because this is one of my favorite things to get student input. Again, number one stakeholder are our kids. Emotional check-ins, daily check-in, you can call it whatever you want. This really helped us just to have daily input of how are you doing as a kid, emotionally. I think part of the mental health we have to think about is our students always show up as, I have to be happy. I'm at school. I'm supposed to be happy. I can't tell people I'm mad or sad or scared or bored or sleepy. Think about as adults. I know for a lot of us in schools, we have to check our energy walking into a school building, and we can't really bring a lot of our baggage into a school. And our kids are the same way. So we need to consider letting our kids know it's okay to not be okay. You can come to school and you can be bored. That's okay with me. But can you still function? That's the biggest question with mental health. Because if it gets to where they can't function, that's when you've got the issue of, ooh, do they need some more support, like a therapist, possibly a doctor to look at them, but this allowed our kids to tell us, I am mad and this is why. And what do I need? And so as a counselor with 900 kids, I couldn't look at these every day, but my teachers did. And we talked to our teachers about when your students do, report they're ready to learn or they are escalated where they're about to throw a chair, then this is a 20-second conversation. You might just check in with that kid. Say, hey, I noticed you are in like the red zone, you're escalated. Is there anything I can do to help? And it might be they ask for the counselor. It could be they say, I just need 10 minutes just to listen to music and just to get my mind right. So having this self-awareness for our students allows them to tell us, I am mad, without slamming a door, screaming at a teacher, throwing a chair, hitting a kid, because that's what was happening. They are showing us all these behaviors, but this allows them to communicate positively and constructively. I can tell you I'm mad without having to hurt you. And this also gets a lot of your students who are internal. That was a whole piece that we were missing, because your internal students who struggle with a lot of depression, some anxiety, they are very good at masking it. They will smile, they are raising their hand, they get great grades. They're probably a leader, of like leader of the month. But man, you start asking them daily and they get more comfortable, they start letting you know that they are worried every day, or that they are bored every day, or they are sad every day. So something's happening. And so that gave us like, oh my goodness, we were missing so many of our students who were struggling internally. And over COVID, we had a few that actually did have suicidal ideations that we found out about because of this form that we would have never known about if they were at school before we did this, which was alarming, but we were so thankful that they were able to share that with us. And they were, I think 2 were 4th graders and one was a 5th grader. So of course, elementary, this might be what you could do physically if you'd like to. Don't do this for secondary. But if you do electronic, I know we preferred Google Forms because this was the snapshot of data we have. This will give you data on your students' emotional states, which as a counselor, I love to see. As a teacher, I would love to see this, so I'm not getting a door slammed in my face every day or having to spend an hour trying to get Johnny to wake his head up so he'll work. This tells me all I need to know. And then over a few weeks, you can start seeing the patterns and what's happening. Then you can reach out to your counselor and say, it's been a couple weeks. They're really not ready to learn. These are some things that are happening. Do you care to check on them? And of course we will. But this gave us data to start looking at some tier 2 interventions for some of our students that were more of SEL based, because we had the tier 1 in place, and this happened daily. So now that we have self-awareness, tell me how you're feeling, tell me your energy. Well, what's next? Coping skills, right? And we have to be careful with coping skills K through 12, because it's so overused. I think like, just go breathe, go get a fidget. It's not what it's meant to be. Coping skills should be very utilized and individualized for our students. As an adult, Do you take 10 deep breaths every single time you're trying to get your energy back to being regulated? Probably not. So our students are not going to do that either. They need some different options. So of course, calming spaces are amazing because it offers different coping skills, different strategies. We call them tools, not toys, which was very big, especially for the families. Because families want to send in stuffed animals, fidgets. We're like, no, it's okay. We got it. We got some stuff here they can use. And the students practice how to use them effectively and safely. And there was always a timer, so you never really had a kid to go there for an hour and then miss out on 2 classes. They always had to still do the work. So there were some expectations, which I've given you the link for a school-wide lesson plan. And we did this with our staff, everybody classified, certified, so they could practice themselves what this looked like. And there are some ideas of some calming space items. And here's just some ideas for coping skills and how to more individualize it. For example, this assessment that I would show to my students, see if I can make it a little bit bigger for you. There you go. So this for our students who the calming spaces really didn't do a whole lot for. We were still seeing escalations and wasn't really regulating them. So we would talk to the kids and say, hey, here's 10 tools. Okay, we would have them out in our office and we would say, tell me how it makes you feel. So we would have them use a fidget for, let's say, 1 minute. We would have them breathe for 1 minute, draw for 1 minute. And the student would rate, am I calmer? Am I more awake? Or did it really not change my energy? And so that showed us, okay, some of these tools are actually escalating our kids, which is not what obviously we want. So that's more individualized of just considering what we do with our coping tools at school. Excuse me. And then I provide you with some other links just for, there's a daily check-in about like, how is your emotional regulation when you go to each class? That may show you some students who struggle with some teacher relationships, possibly, or some content when their data shows they're escalated going to reading every day. It will show you patterns. So at your school level, you can start intervening proactively to figure out what does the kid need before they go to reading. Is it a mindset? Is it a teacher relationship? And of course, cognitive coping skills. I love those. And to me, I got a lot more of our students using those to regulate, to distract the brain. So they would say the ABCs backwards. They would find items of a certain color all around the room. And for those 30 seconds or 1 minute, whatever their timer set, that distracted them from whatever made them angry. And then they could work. Now we would talk about, later on, hey, I noticed you got angry during this. Tell me what happened. Tell me what you did to still be able to work. You can still be angry, but we have to regulate. And I think that's what a lot of times gets missed with coping skills is it's not about making you happy again. It's about regulating and we don't even want to say calm down, but just, are you able to function to get through this math test? Are you able to function to walk down the hallway without spinning and jumping and hitting your other classmates? So I think the words we use with our students is so important that if we just say coping skills will make you happy, well, as adults, I can function and work, but I may not be happy. With so much going on, I may be really struggling, but I can do my job and see kids or teach or whatever it may be. And I think that's something for the adult part of this that's huge for the well-being. It's okay if you're not sunshines and rainbows, but how do you get to where you can function and love on your kids and have relationships with them? Okay. Emotion versus problem focused. There's a chart on here. I started using this with 4th graders. It shows 2 different types of coping skills. Do you need coping skills for your emotions or for solving a problem? And that got them thinking of, oh, okay, am I emotionally not regulated or am I just having a problem right now and I need to think about my steps? So that's something, and it has a very clear chart of what each one means to maybe consider for like some tier 1 self-management lessons, or even a small group. If you have a self-management small group of students who need some help with coping skills, that's a great place to start for 4th grade and up. Empathy interviews are great. It really starts digging into the why behind some behaviors. So again, we're getting student voice. A lot of administrators have started using these for students who get referred for behavior a lot. And then some counselors will kind of tag onto it as well, just to start hearing from the student, tell me what's right with you, what's strong with you. This is your asset driven whole child education. Because versus just referring them all the time and nothing's really changing, what's good about that kid? Yes, we know there's going to be days we're up to here with them, but we've got to find what's right and what's strong about this student to intervene appropriately. So this is great to as part of your restorative practices for your buildings, if they're there. Community circles is another tier 1 initiative. It takes 10 minutes once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever can be done. I've given you our school-wide lesson plan. We did this with our staff. This just builds community, empathy, communication. Especially now since COVID, our students struggle to build relationships with each other, especially with so much technology. This allows them to speak in front of 30 kids and to share their opinions and to listen respectfully to each other. So I really like this to build culture within those classrooms, and to have the teacher step back as you're not running this classroom. All of you are listening and you're giving opinions and input within your classroom. So that's a different shift in some of the leadership. Mindfulness. I think we have to be careful with mindfulness. A lot of families think it's yoga. It's not. So I think just again, educating and informing our families, what is true mindfulness? I've given you a couple videos that are really fun, a few activities. Again, I think of mindfulness as being where our feet are at. If I'm on, you all are here for about an hour and a half today. Are you here? Or is the phone ringing over here? I know outside my door, there was a big truck out here a while ago. So that's what we're teaching our students is when you're in the lunchroom, are you focused on eating and talking to your friends? Or are you thinking about recess, sports that night? And as adults, I think we do that a lot is I'm here, but I'm thinking of 6 other things I have to do right now. I know I love Mindful Monkey, Happy Panda, that picture book for elementary age students, because that says what it talks about is I'm playing, but I'm thinking about eating. I'm eating and I'm thinking about sleeping. That causes stress. And a lot of students and adults don't realize that. That raises your stress level, just thinking about other things versus just being mindful of where am I at for this 20 minutes and I can focus on this. Sociograms are great to do as a tier 1. A lot of my teachers started doing these and took them off from me from guidance classes. The students just write down. I would recommend this for 4th grade and up. They had a classmate island, and you write down who would you want to live beside, who would you want to work with, who would you want to go have fun with. And you look at the class list, see how many kids have been written down, put tally marks beside their names. And it shows you which kids are seen as leaders, within that classroom, but it also shows you the kids that are never written down, which is a concern. And so I would share with my staff the kids who were never written down to get the teacher input of, do they see that in their classroom? Are they seeing some students play by themselves, not really engage in conversation? And then we start looking at how can we build up those leadership skills and get that kid to be seen as valuable in that classroom. So that's always nice to do for students who may really not be seen as a leader or have purpose. Peer mediation, I love. For at the very youngest, I would do 5th grade. All through high school, though, this is very relevant. I would train mediators who applied. Anybody could apply within 5th grade. I typically didn't try to have over 20, 25 is pushing it, but 20 was, pretty big. I would train them when teachers would allow me to have them at a class. It took about 3 to 4 hours sporadically. they would create a video or a PowerPoint and go show the other classes what a mediator is, what they do for a mediation. It's never that you're in trouble. It's just you want to solve a problem. And my kids loved it. I would put them in my office and I would walk out. There was always 2 mediators together. They had a script, like I've provided that for you. And we had a lot of students who would see them just to, talk through some drama they were having, a problem. This helps decrease some of those kids who are just kind of in drama a lot. And again, they'll say things to peers that they may never come and see a counselor about. So peer mediation, I know I'm a huge advocate for that, just to have that peer-to-peer relationship and communication. This is something you could offer for your teachers for trauma-informed teaching. Very quick, simple ways. Are they doing this or are they not? A lot of this stuff I'm sure they're trying to do. What's something maybe they want to try? Just one thing for 1 year or even after Christmas. Can you add this one thing into your classroom? Then they would have this, they would write down, our students would write down what they want to hear on tough days. So the teachers would know if this student's having a bad day, I just need to pat them on the back. Or if this student's having a bad day, they just need me to come up and reassure them that it's okay. And I also show this to my principals, because as a staff member, if my principal knew what I wanted to hear on my bad day, that builds a lot of culture in my building and well-being. So that might be something to consider with adults. We changed how we did our reflective questions, like, what'd you do this summer? This is what we started doing, because we know a lot of students who have mental health issues, trauma. They're going to lie. They're going to make up stories to try to fit in with the other kids, because their summers were not good. Their Christmas break is not good. Right now, I'm sure we have a lot of behavior spiking. It's the holidays. So that was something that was just a paradigm shift for our teachers. Nothing extra, just a different way to ask a question. Just building relationships. These are just some things to consider with some of your staff members. The 3 questions I think are big for any staff member, classified or certified. Brian Mindler has a very specific way to greet students. Kids know when it's not real. They know when you have to stand there and monitor for safety, and when you're not really greeting them with your eyes. Or some say it's because we get paid to. Well, no, that's not why. But just little things like that to be genuine. When kids come into your classroom, to your office, into your school, even if they're late, how are we greeting them when they do come to school? Because obviously we want them there. Anchor point adults are great, just to kind of have some smaller groups of kids for one mentor. And it can be, again, anybody in your building. Take on 2 or 3 kids just to check on, like maybe once or twice a week. How's it going? Hey, I heard you won your game. Hey, you've got that math test coming up, but are you ready? So just things like that, to have an extra person supporting them at school is always nice. Relationship mapping to kind of see how many of your kids are really known by your staff members beyond behavior, attendance, grades. 60-second strategies. This is especially for secondary level, just to work in if they're having just like, how do I build an SEL to some of my lessons? These are 60-second strategies that they can do. Very quick. The videos show how to do it. But this is just a different way to gain some feedback and reflect with your students, which they do anyway, but this is just a different way, and a little bit more purposeful with some SEL in mind. So how do we use our stakeholders? Within your buildings, I know the first thing I always did was I looked at my staff and what are they strong at? Very asset driven. What are the geniuses of my staff? They like kids if they're in a school, probably for the most part. And I looked at everybody, classified, certified. I'm one person. I need everybody to help these kids and wrap around them. My related arts teachers, music, PE, library, they were amazing at doing different ways to implement SEL, and they would help with some small groups. They were not counseling, but they would do like some coping skills with music. My PE and health teachers would help do different strategies with students about regulating energy with the brain and the body connected. So they're an untapped resource if you have never used them for any type of mentoring, interventions with students, even small groups. They're not counseling, but they can do some behavioral strategies with your students, and they think about it in such a different way. Any classified staff, they would love, I mean, they could take one mentor or even have some kid come do a job for them. Again, find their genius and what they're good at. I know we had one student who loved hunting. He went deer hunting. That was a big deal. Camo. And we had one staff member who loved hunting. So of course I connected them together, and they did a 2x10 intervention for like 10 days. And then after the 10 days was up, they, of course, my staff member was like, do I have to like quit seeing him? Like, I kind of want to hear how his hunting goes. So they kept checking in every week, just really fast. So it's little things like that to find, what is your staff strong at? Your administrators, if they can take time just to help with one kid, even a lunch bunch, something like that. Mental health providers, like a lot of you all on this call. Oh my goodness, we used our mental health providers probably more than we were supposed to, I'm gonna be honest, because we valued your work so much. They would help us do parent trainings. They would help us do small groups with students. And of course, seeing their individual students when it got to that point. But man, we use them for so much, within our buildings. And community partners, of course, we had them coming in to mentor kids, volunteer work, friskies. Oh my goodness, they are, amazing. We use them a lot, the nurse and the health aides. So again, just find the geniuses of your staff and start looking at how can they take on some of these kids that if I'm a counselor, I cannot give all these kids the same amount of time for just whatever's happening. But I have a staff who loves kids and who will absolutely help out. For our families, I think the biggest thing with mental health is we know that it's got a negative stigma, and I know we're working hard to remove it. Just mental health in itself, I think, scares people. But I think the first thing is to make sure, whether it's an infographic or it's at an open house, or it's even, some kind of training we do with our parents, like at open house night or a kindergarten night, is understanding what is the difference between all the service providers your school may have. So for example, in my schools, I had obviously a counselor, we had community-based therapist and a school psych. And we would discuss what are the different roles of what we do, but how do we intertwine as well to help your child. So I think the education part of that is so important. So parents know these are people who can help me with certain things. The school counselor obviously should be visible, and accessibility is the biggest thing for a counselor. They need to be accessible to all kids. It's very worrisome when our teenagers are telling us kids have to wait weeks and months for the school counselor. That's concerning. So we want to make sure they have access, because again, like a lot of you all, there's a very different skill set that we all have that other people are not able to talk to students when things happen. And if we're in ARC meetings or doing other, monitoring activities, and a kid has to wait 3 hours that has possibly been abused or is considering suicide because I'm in an ARC meeting, like that's not feasible. So we have to start rethinking how that works. Educating families, what is positive mental health and how is it so important, like your physical health? It doesn't mean that it's like crazy or that everybody needs therapy. It's nothing like that. It just means, what does it truly mean to be positively mentally healthy? How do you function? How do you make sure you're regulated? Because the trusted adults in their life, they are the ones who model everything for our students. So a lot of the behaviors and the issues we see in our schools, that's what's happening at home. And so we have to wrap around as a staff and with our communities to start looking at what are some things to help with our families with their stresses. How are they handling stress in front of their kids? Not that we're going to do parenting, absolutely not, but just promoting and encouraging some positive mental health strategies like we've discussed today. Collaborating with local safety experts. Our SROs are so important. Our social workers, community-based therapists, just to make sure that they can tie into some different trainings that our families may need, some collaborations, that it's safe, especially with tech. Anything you all can do with your families with tech and how kids are using it is probably one of the top 3 most important things right now. If it's not, probably it could be number 1. A lot of families don't realize if they're having their phones in their rooms at night, that's not good at all. How many unsafe people are out there trying to get access to our students, and not just through phones, but through video games. And so a lot of our families don't realize that. And a lot of the kids are not going to tell because they feel like they're going to be in trouble if they shared a picture, or if they put something, or if they downloaded an app, family didn't know about it. So we really have to make sure we are encouraging our families to check histories, search engines, work with the cell phone companies they have to make sure, well, what security could they offer to put on their phones for their students. And then family roundtables, kind of like the student roundtables, listening to our families. They will tell you what's happening for the most part, and what they need. And so that way, as a school, you can wrap around to help them with strategies, different ideas, and just gain their perspective of, from their environment, this is what they're seeing and hearing, to start driving what are we doing with our mental health. And I would share this with my families about just building emotional resilience. We don't want to enable our students and solve all their problems and be the helicopter and the lawnmower parent. But they need to kind of, experience mistakes and some failure, not to have F's all year. Don't get me wrong, not that. But there's going to be some failing here and there, just to experience how to overcome that challenge. And I shared an article for when is it more than just worrying. A lot of the parents, like you all put for anxiety, struggle to know what's worrying versus true anxiety. That always came up. And there's a quick video about just what is mental health. That might be something to put on your website, your blogs, social media, whatever you have for your families. And this is something I know if I were to ever go back into a high school, I would have a student council or somebody, or some type of team, create a visual for my kids within my building. Just these quick little posters like this that have a snapshot of, these are 10 ways to look after your child's mental health, or how do students boost their mental health. These are great visuals that can be student created. And I think with student created, your students will look at it more, versus if I'm a counselor and I'm sharing this with you, oh, well, you're an adult, you're giving this to me. But if my peers created it, I might listen more and I might look at it more. So those are just a couple visuals just to think about, especially for secondary. Okay, so that's kind of all I had for the information, strategies, activities. So if you have questions, I would love to hear questions or anything.
We do have some questions. A repeat question is, can they still have the slides after the presentation?
Would you like me to reshare them again?
I didn't check the link. Did that include all the slides or only the resources?
It has all the slides.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
So the first question is, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. The first question is, what are some of the initiatives supported or provided by Kentucky Department of Education to share information about behavioral health with school staff?
Okay.
Do you need me to repeat it?
Well, I know KDE. So one of the slides had the where was it? It was the one with my behavior toolbox. It has, so there's a KDE social, emotional, and behavioral resource page. So there's some resources on that, and that will include some different training ideas, some specific resources, some screening ideas. I do know Sources of Strength and Too Good for Drugs are two different initiatives and curriculums. I know KDE does promote that they will offer training, some data tracking tools that are, behavior and SEL character based, that a lot of our districts are using right now. And then as far as I know, like PBIS, for example, there's information on that one website within that slide, and I'll find which number it is real fast. But there's some information about PBIS, and something else you might want to consider besides just KDE resources is there it is, slide 16. I had the KDE site, is reaching out to your local cooperative. So if you're at GREC, OVEC, KEDC, WKEC, all the cooperatives around Kentucky, they have a lot of trainings that kind of stem from what we talked about today for trauma informed, different types of behaviors, PBIS. So that would also be somebody you might want to reach out. And if you are, feel free to email me, then we can figure out which co-op you're affiliated with. But they are always providing virtual and in-person trainings for a lot of different topics that we did today, a lot more specifically. So that could be an also resource for you.
As you were talking, I was trying to drop some links in the chat. So I dropped the link that talks about what Kentucky cooperatives are and the different ones across the state. So you might still need help deciding which one you belong to, but if not, the list is there. Someone asked about the slides again. She dropped that in the chat. If you missed that, just comment back in the chat and we'll copy and paste it again. The next question is, are schools required to have multi-tier systems of support, or is that a district decision?
So KDE, I'm not sure required is the right word. Recommended, I think, would be the right word. Because everything we do is based on the legislation, of course, and the law. And I'm not sure there's an actual law that says you have to have MTSS. However, to do what is recommended to do, yes, you really need to have some MTSS supports, academics, SEL, behavior. A lot of what kind of we talked about today, I know, was more focused on tier 1. But if you really want to, wrap around your students, and I know it's a kymtss.org. They have an implementation guide, they have resources. And actually we're building an SEL implementation guide to piggyback off of their umbrella of MTSS for SEL. That'll be out in the spring. With our co-ops, actually, our SEL specialists are building that. But that would be maybe where to start. But now your district, they should have some different policies of what some MTSS should look like what's the protocol to move kids in and out of tiers 1, 2, and 3. What is the process, of going from tier 1 to tier 2? What are you supposed to be looking at? And then the same for tier 2 to tier 3. And of course, with what we discussed today, it's always kind of gray, I feel like, with a lot of what we do, especially with elementary. Because when you look at students who need tier 2 supports for behavior and SEL, if they don't have progress in 6 weeks, we don't just want to shove them into tier 3 automatically. We want to focus on the functions of behavior. What is their communication? What do they need? What are they strong at that we can build our intervention off of? So required, maybe not so much, but recommended, absolutely. Across the state, yes.
We had a question in the chat. What is MM Guardian?
What is what?
MM Guardian?
I'm not sure. Where was it on a slide?
Ashley, if you could type. Oh, someone else replied and says it's an amazing app for parents to put on children's phones.
Oh, thank you.
I saw the question before I saw the response.
No, thank you. I'm glad somebody shared that. Awesome.
I wasn't familiar with it either.
Did I put that on a slide?
Someone asked about sources of strength, and if either Diane or Vanessa could type in chat who our current staff person is with the Kentucky Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities, who's over sources of strength. If you could type that in the chat, we can get anybody that's interested in knowing about sources of strength in Kentucky and where it's already located and how to get that going in your school.
Yeah.
And you're getting lots of kudos in the chat, by the way. People
Oh,
are very happy with the presentation, all of the resources. Someone has already printed off the slides and handed them to a principal. So,
oh my goodness.
movement is happening.
I love it. So be careful, because I know it's so funny you said that. When I show the school counselor appropriate and inappropriate activities, that chart, and if you've ever seen it, you know the one I'm talking about. First thing I tell my counselors, do not go print this out and put it on your principal's desk because it's not going to happen overnight. So, but no, I appreciate you all being able to use some of the resources we've shared. And I know it's a lot for an hour and a half. And like I said, a lot of these initiatives branch off into other trainings, presentations, workshops. So this is like a huge snapshot, and it's only tier 1.
So I got a private message. Someone asked about how to advocate for these interventions at the local level. If you don't have someone already on board at your school, what can you do?
So at your district levels is what I'm assuming, because obviously your local board, kind of decides a lot of what's happening. First thing, kind of like we discussed, I would start looking at the data. I would see, do you have any local data as far as like, are you doing screeners or surveys or anything like that may show the need for your students? And this is where we are. I would also look at your district improvement plan, your CDIP, and then look at your school, your CSIP, to see what are the goals that they've decided for your district, and to look at, excuse me, are they considering anything with behavior, trauma informed, excuse me, with SEL? They might mention mental health. I'm not sure. Some do, some don't. And I would look, and if they have any of that, that would be some advocacy points to say, well, hey, it's in our district improvement plan. We want to get this increased or decreased. These are some initiatives to do that. To me, I think the biggest advocacy point is where our kids are right now. Mental health behaviors are spiking, and they're not going away, at least not for another year or 2 or 3. So our educators need help to deal with it, to be honest. They need help just to practice for their own selves, and then a regulated adult can help regulate our kids better. So I think promoting some adult well-being, I think, would help with the advocacy for it. And again, everything we've talked about today is not extra time. It's not extra money. It's not extra lessons. A lot of what this is just taking a PD day, or maybe jumping in for 10 minutes during faculty meetings once a month, and starting to just train some of your staff and coach them on, we know our students look and sound like this in our buildings. Here are some ideas you could try and start. So I think if a lot of your local people hear it's not more money and things like that, I know that's advocacy in itself, because we just don't have money. And I also think informing them about what is the role of a school counselor. I think that's huge throughout all of this, the underlying theme. And if you have, like a lot of you are community-based therapists, providers, how do you collaborate with the educators and your families? Because if you're not collaborating at that local level with your skill set and your genius, I think that is a huge untapped resource that could absolutely be used, again, to collaborate, not come in and say, this is what we're doing, but how do we wrap around our students? And would you want me to help provide a training for your families or your district staff, or even starting with your central office staff and then trickling it out to your administrators? So I think any of those talking points, I think, would help advocate to start slowly implementing. And again, this is a slow process. We know that. So, yep.
Okay, one last call for any questions. Okay.